The champagne hadn't even been poured when Gerald stood up at our son's wedding and said, "This will be my last family event with Eleanor. We've decided to separate." I froze. It was like the room stopped breathing. Our son Peter was mid-laugh. The music was still playing. I had just pinned his boutonniere and kissed his cheek. Gerald didn't look at me, didn't offer an explanation, just smiled politely and sat down like he'd shared something routine. My hands trembled around the stem of my champagne glass. Whispers began spreading through the room like wildfire. I glanced at Peter. He looked devastated, confused. I looked back at Gerald, but he refused to meet my eyes. Not a single word of warning, not a conversation. After 37 years of marriage, he ended it during our child's wedding. That moment shattered everything. But he miscalculated one thing. I wasn't going to stay quiet. I'm Eleanor Briggs, 60 years old, former elementary school principal. I retired 2 years ago, after 35 years of teaching, leading, and shaping young minds. I raised 2 boys, Peter and Thomas. I baked birthday cakes from scratch. I decorated the house for every holiday. I believed in quiet strength, in loyalty, in knowing the right thing, even when no one was watching. Gerald and I were married for 37 years. He worked in finance, managing portfolios and rubbing elbows at industry events. He always had a plan. He liked to lead, and I let him, trusting that we were on the same team. We made it through difficult times. My mother's cancer, Peter's rocky teenage years, layoffs and relocations. We were survivors. I thought we were finally easing into the golden years, planning river cruises through Europe, remodeling the kitchen, and starting a garden together. The morning of Peter's wedding, everything felt normal. I helped him fix his tie, kissed his cheek, told him how proud I was. I hugged his fiancée's mother, posed for photos, and took my seat second row from the front. When Gerald clinked his glass at the reception, I expected a toast, a proud dad moment. Instead, he looked around and said, "This will be the last family event Eleanor and I attend together. We've decided to separate." I didn't cry. Not yet. I walked out of the hall, into the parking lot, and sat in the car until the music faded behind me. When I got home, his side of the closet was empty, a drawer left half open, a suitcase missing. No note, no explanation, no apology. Peter texted later that night, "I didn't know, Mom, I swear." I believed him. But something inside me stirred, an unease I couldn't ignore. The next day, my sister Joan dropped by with coffee and worry on her face. "He's been acting different," she said. "Flashy suits, Instagram photos of expensive meals. I thought maybe he was just celebrating retirement." I nodded, but deep down a voice whispered, this wasn't just a sudden decision. He'd been planning this. That Monday, I drove to his office with some leftover tax forms. The receptionist, young, nervous, looked up when I said, "I'm Eleanor, Gerald's wife." Her smile flickered. She stood too fast. "He's not here," she said. "Actually, he's traveling." She was lying. I could feel it. I knew that tight-lipped discomfort from 1,000 parent-teacher conferences. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and pulled up our shared bank accounts. At first, I couldn't quite place what I was seeing. Strange wire transfers, unfamiliar companies, jewelry charges in states we'd never visited, hotel bookings under his business card, always one guest. That night, I didn't sleep. I printed everything, filed it in a binder. Each page added weight to the truth. Gerald hadn't just left me. He'd been building a life without me for months, maybe years. And I wasn't just going to cry over it. I was going to find out everything. The financial records didn't lie. The first thing I noticed was the steady drain from our joint account. Small transfers at first, then larger ones, all routed to something labeled GB Consulting. I had never heard of it. But over $180,000, 0 cents, had vanished in under a year. I never approved a single withdrawal. Then came the credit cards. I hadn't touched the platinum card in years, but it was maxed out. So was the travel card. I called the bank, and the charges didn't match anything I recognized. Jewelry, electronics, first-class flights, all under my name. I checked the mortgage next. That's when I stopped breathing. Gerald had refinanced the house without telling me. The documents were forged. My name scrawled in a third grader so sloppy and inconsistent, it wouldn't fool a third grader. But it had passed. I went to our retirement fund last. I was almost afraid to click. The account was empty. Over $600,000 gone. I sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, papers spread in front of me, hands trembling. Every transaction told a story, and none of them included me. Gerald hadn't just left our marriage. He had dismantled our life, brick by brick. In secret. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was a calculated disappearance. I hired a forensic accountant the next morning. Her name was Camille Sharp, discreet and fiercely competent. Within 3 days, she had tracked down the offshore accounts. Gerald had created a personal trust, hidden assets, structured transfers, all designed to leave me nothing. But it didn't end there. Camille discovered that Gerald had filed documents to obtain residency in Belize. He already had a condo waiting for him, oceanfront, paid in full. And he wasn't going alone. There was a woman. Her name was Lily, 29, a real estate agent. She had been tagging photos from Belize under a private account. Camille got in, and there he was, Gerald, smiling in the background of a boat photo, wearing the same watch I had given him on our 30th anniversary, arms wrapped around Lily, laughing. Free. While I was picking out flowers for Peter's wedding, Gerald was picking out a beachfront escape. It hit me in waves. Betrayal, disgust, rage. For years, I'd stood beside him, held his hand through failures, supported his career, packed his lunches, celebrated his wins. And he repaid that with lies, theft, and a smug announcement over wedding cake. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was livid. I scheduled an appointment with Denise Tran, a highly recommended divorce attorney known for her precision and toughness in financial cases. I brought everything: stacks of bank statements, forged mortgage documents, screenshots of wire transfers, the photo of Gerald with Lily on the boat. I even printed the vacation itinerary Camille had found buried in his email records. Denise flipped through the paper calmly, then leaned back in her chair and looked at me with steady eyes. "We're not just filing for divorce," she said. "We're going to make him wish he never underestimated you." Within a week, Denise uncovered something critical. Gerald's longtime business partner, Howard, had recently been forced out of their firm under suspicious circumstances. Gerald had claimed the company was suffering financial losses and used that to justify a minimal buyout. But if Gerald had money for condos in Belize and private cruises, something wasn't adding up. I called Howard. At first he didn't believe me. Then I told him about the Belize trust, the drained accounts, and the fake consulting firm. There was silence, then a bitter laugh. "That makes sense," he muttered. He told me we were in the red while he was shifting funds behind my back. We met the next morning for coffee. Howard brought a folder full of internal memos and transaction records Gerald had tried to bury. The documents showed clearly that Gerald had been hiding profits, filing false claims, and misrepresenting the company's financial status to reduce Howard's payout. Together, we gathered a formal case for Corrigan's case hap, and enough to alert the board of directors and begin preparing a fraud complaint. Meanwhile, Denise worked fast. She filed an emergency motion to freeze all joint marital assets and any associated personal trusts. She included evidence of identity fraud, forged signatures, offshore transfers, and digital communication logs that indicated intent to defraud. We received a court order within 72 hours. Gerald's accounts were frozen. His Belize condo deal was halted. Business transactions flagged. That night, Gerald called me from an unfamiliar number. His voice was sharp, angry. "You've embarrassed me, Eleanor," he said through clenched teeth. "In front of my colleagues, my friends." I held the phone steady. "No," I replied. "You embarrassed yourself. I'm just making sure the world sees it." Click. By the end of the week, Lily had deleted all her vacation photos and unfollowed Gerald on every platform. According to Camille's sources, she ghosted him completely once the money dried up and the legal notices began rolling in. Gerald was stuck. No money, no girlfriend, no tropical escape. And I was only just beginning to dismantle the life he tried to steal. Camille returned a few days later with more findings, things I hadn't even considered. Gerald had been submitting fake business expenses for years, and many of them were filed under my name. Thousands of dollars spent on high-end electronics, designer clothes, jewelry, even a monthly wine subscription, none of which I had ever seen. Camille suspected he was laying groundwork for a claim that I had been irresponsible with money, a tactic to deflect during a divorce proceeding. And then it got worse. He had accessed old therapy records, entries I had shared with him privately during a vulnerable time years ago, when I was grieving the loss of my mother. He had scanned those pages and forwarded them to a mediator he consulted in secret months earlier. In the email, he implied I was emotionally unstable, unfit to manage finances, and prone to dramatic outbursts. I couldn't breathe reading it. I had trusted him with those pages. He used them like weapons. But the real breaking point came when Camille pulled up property documents for our vacation cottage in Maine, the one we'd built together 15 years ago, with stained cedar siding and a white porch swing that Gerald installed himself. I wasn't listed on the deed anymore. Somewhere along the line, Gerald had filed a quitclaim deed without my knowledge, erasing my legal connection to the property. It felt like a punch to the chest. That cottage had my name etched into the kitchen wall, next to the boys' growth chart. I sat on the porch with Camille, trying to absorb everything. The air was still, and my hands trembled as I wrapped them around a cup of tea. "How could someone live with you for nearly 40 years and still do something like this?" I asked quietly, my voice sturdy's confidence evident. My voice still took its cut. "Yeah." When Camille went to move the teapot. Camille looked at me without blinking. "Because he assumed you'd never fight back." That night, I curled up on the living room sofa and cried for hours. Not just from the betrayal, but because I had ignored my instincts for so long. The signs were always there. His sudden bursts of anger, the way he guarded his phone, his strange absences. I explained it away. Work stress, age, distance. Anything but the truth, because I still believed in our marriage, even when he had clearly stopped long ago. Peter came over the next morning. He looked pale, guilty. He wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Mom. I feel like I never really knew Dad." I hugged him tightly. Neither did I. Later that afternoon, I went through Gerald's old laptop that he left behind in the closet. I found an email thread between him and Lily. In one of the messages, she asked, "What about your wife?" His response was 2 sentences. "She's too soft, always has been. She'll fold." That sentence didn't hurt me. It lit something inside me. Something sharp, something steady. I wasn't soft. I was done doubting myself. And I was just getting started. Anise and Camille worked with laser precision. We weren't just filing for divorce anymore. We were building a legal assault grounded in fraud, identity theft, and intentional asset concealment. Denise filed a motion for a full forensic review of every account Gerald had access to. Camille subpoenaed the financial records of GB Consulting and cross-referenced every payment trail. Howard, Gerald's former business partner, provided memos and tax discrepancies that showed profits being hidden and reported losses that never existed. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. While they built the legal foundation, I got to work on documentation. I printed every email, every bank statement, every transaction. I highlighted forged documents, marked K-Wine, and created a master document. The deposition was scheduled for the following Thursday. Gerald arrived tan and overly confident, like he'd just returned from a luxury retreat. He sat across from me in the conference room, smug in his seat, probably expecting me to be silent, maybe tearful, maybe apologetic. He didn't get that version of me. Denise began calmly. She slid the forged refinance documents across the table. Gerald squinted at them, then looked up. "That's Eleanor's signature," he said. Denise nodded. Then she produced an affidavit from a certified handwriting expert, comparing my verified signature to the one on the document. "This wasn't signed by Mrs. Briggs," she said plainly. Gerald cleared his throat. His lawyer whispered something, but Gerald waved him off. Denise moved on. She showed screenshots of transfers to GB Consulting, asking for Gerald to identify the recipient. He claimed it was a shell account for business marketing. Then, Howard stepped into the room with his attorney. The air shifted. Howard slid his own packet across the table, complete with ledgers, internal memos, and a signed statement outlining Gerald's misappropriation of funds and falsified business losses. "You lied to me," Howard said. "Now, the state's going to find out." Gerald's skin went pale. For the first time in decades, he looked completely undone. When Denise asked if he'd like to respond, Gerald muttered, "No." Within 72 hours, the court froze all his international assets. The Belize condo he had purchased with marital funds was now part of the asset investigation. His accounts were flagged for audit. His remaining credit was suspended. Camille confirmed Lily had already wiped her presence from his accounts and had returned to her former fiancé. Instagram confirmed it, with a photo captioned, "A week later, I sent Gerald a final message. It was short. She said I was too soft. I'm not. I just needed a reason." Then came the final ruling. The judge awarded me 80% of our joint assets, including the main cottage and all domestic properties. Gerald was left with outstanding debts, pending fraud charges, and a civil lawsuit filed by Howard's company. I sold the main cottage, the one he thought he had stolen from me, and donated 25% of the sale to a women's legal advocacy organization in Boston. I made the donation under my maiden name, Eleanor Wallace. It was the name I hadn't used in decades, but it felt right. That name had never been manipulated. That name had never been betrayed. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about reclaiming power. My voice, my worth, my future. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting. I was leading. And I was far from finished. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for anyone else's comfort. I wasn't adjusting myself to fit inside someone else's silence. I wasn't making space for anyone who couldn't make space for me. I was, finally, entirely my own. I moved into a beautiful brownstone in the city. It had creaky floors, tall windows, and a kitchen that begged for Sunday morning pancakes. No more his and hers furniture. No neutral walls designed to keep the peace. I filled the space with what I loved. Deep jewel tones, vintage lamps with personality. I bought a dog, a golden retriever named Stella. She snores, sheds, and has a habit of stealing my sock. I love her completely. I started attending a support group for women over 50 navigating sudden divorce and betrayal. At first, I just listened. But eventually, I spoke. I told them everything. The wedding, the bank statements, the signature he forged, the moment I realized I wasn't too soft. I was just unawakened. Some of them cried. Some of them nodded like they'd been waiting to hear those exact words from someone who'd lived it. Most had lived in silence for years, carrying shame that was never theirs to hold. They thought they were too old to start over, too stuck to matter. I told them that wasn't true. We weren't too old. We were just beginning. Peter came by often, more than he used to. He brought me pastries from the bakery near his office, and helped hang curtains I pretended I couldn't manage on my own. My younger son, Thomas, called every Sunday. Sometimes he'd drive over just to have tea and talk about nothing. For the first time in their lives, they saw me not just as mom, but as Eleanor, a woman with a spine and a story. A woman who could survive betrayal and still make room for joy. I accepted a part-time role at a nonprofit that supports older women rebuilding after financial abuse. I reviewed legal documents, taught basic budgeting, and helped women open their first bank accounts in years. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It became a tool, a blueprint, a bridge. One woman told me, "You gave me permission to want more." That sentence stayed with me longer than any apology Gerald could ever attempt. Speaking of Gerald, he did try. Months later, a letter came in the mail. No return address, just my name, written in the same familiar slant I used to love. I held it for a long time. I considered opening it, even thought about what he might say. Maybe regret, maybe excuses, maybe love rewritten to fit his convenience. But I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I had already read the only story that mattered, the one I wrote myself, with courage, truth, and a future he never expected me to claim. Some things are better left unread, especially when your best chapters are just beginning. 1 year later, I stood on the courthouse steps with Denise and Camille. The sun was bright, the breeze gentle, and the weight I had carried for over a year had finally lifted. We had just finalized the last of the fraud proceedings. Gerald had taken a plea deal to avoid jail time, agreed to full restitution, and quietly disappeared into the background of a life he no longer controlled. We wasn't the man at the head of the table anymore. He wasn't the one with the mic at the wedding. He was simply gone. I looked up at the sky, not to ask for anything, just to breathe, just to feel peace. It wasn't revenge that brought me joy, not in the end. It was truth. It was justice. It was the quiet but steady knowing that I refused to disappear. I didn't fade into a stereotype or become the woman left behind. I rose. Stella tugged gently on her leash, eager for her afternoon walk. She didn't care about lawsuits or settlements. She just wanted sunshine and the squirrel she hadn't caught in weeks. As we walked past a park, I saw 2 women close to my age sitting on a bench, laughing over coffee and a half-eaten muffin. I smiled, nodding as I passed. I belonged in this world again, not as someone defined by what she lost, but by what she reclaimed. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the porch wrapped in my favorite shawl. The phone buzzed, and Peter's name lit up the screen. His voice was full of excitement. "Mom," he said, "I got the promotion. I'm heading the new division." I cheered. "That's incredible, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." He paused. "I'm proud of you too. You're the strongest person I know." That sentence hit deeper than he realized. It wasn't just pride in what I'd overcome, it was recognition. For years, I had been the quiet one, the steady one, the keeper of peace. But now, I was the fighter, the survivor, the woman who refused to be written out of her own story. Inside the house, on the top shelf of my bookcase, sat a photo from my wedding day. I hadn't taken it down, not because I missed Gerald. I didn't. But because that photo captured something else. It reminded me of the woman I used to be. The woman who believed in loyalty, in tradition, in showing up for people even when they didn't deserve it. And the woman I am now? She still believes in love, still believes in Sunday dinners, and handwritten notes, and the smell of lilacs in spring. But most importantly, she believes in herself. Finally, my name is Eleanor Briggs. I'm 61 now. And I'm not bitter. I'm better. If you've ever felt discarded, betrayed, or erased, hear me when I say this. You are not too old. You are not too late. And you are not alone. My husband tried to ruin me. He underestimated me. He thought I was soft. But what he didn't know is that soft things don't break. They bend. They adapt. And when the time is right, they rise. Maybe you've lived through your own version of betrayal. Maybe your story involves someone who looked you in the eye while hiding everything behind your back. Or maybe you're still in that fog, trying to make sense of it all. Don't stay there. Ask yourself this: if the truth were finally in your hands, what would you do with it? Would you let it define your ending? Or your beginning? I'd love to hear from you. What part of my story hit home? Have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone you trusted let you down? Let me know in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if this story moved something in you, I've left 2 more stories right here that you won't forget. Stories of women who didn't just survive betrayal, they transformed because of it. Thank you for being part of my story. And thank you for letting me be part of yours.